So, hi, this is Scott Park Phillips, and I am interviewing Rondel Benjamin, or Benji, I assume you prefer to be called.
Definitely.
And this is really exciting. We talked previously, and he recommended a number of books, which I have now read. So we expect a deeper conversation than, just expect us to go deeper. And he is a martial artist with a very wide range of experience, particularly in the Japanese realm. He is from Trinidad, we'll say. He spent some time as a young person in the United States, so has a cultural capacity to transition between cultures, I believe, and and he is a practitioner of Kalinda, which I'm going to let him define because we actually want to keep it pretty open, I think. Go ahead.
Yes. Kalinda, very interesting word, and has over the years been very difficult to track down. When I originally learned Kalinda from the elders in Moruga, it was considered to be a collection of songs of warrior or battle hymns, or a collection of ritual dances. It has been translated as the way of the drum, or to drum to oppose. There's some Bantu phonetics which indicate it can mean he and she going together, or we go. It also connects to a very interesting tradition in Eastern Europe, a tradition of caroling or of singing. So again, the collection of songs. It's one of those words that is found in literature from Louisiana to Brazil, all throughout the Afro-American, in the true word sense of the word American, which is the Americas diaspora. And it's used in two main ways. It's used to define or express the romantic dances, and to express the ritualized combat dances, and how those dances intersect.
If people were to go to YouTube, probably the first thing they would see is stick fighting.
Yes.
Under the name Kalinda.
Yeah, which is a misnomer. It's if you take 4 or 5 things that are together and you only express or describe the exciting one. So in Trinidad, if you look at like the literature, you'll see that it's a collection of dances, one of which is Musundi, or Trinidad stick fighting, the martial version. But if you go to Martinique next door, it'll be a male-female dance where women are dancing with men, and men cut in and separate each other. So it's a cutting in and out ring dance. Both are Kalinda. The drumming patterns are the same. And they are, in Bantu thought, they are the opposing expressions of the same energy, right? They're not a different thing. So in Brazil, there's a game called Jogo de Pau and the Quilombos. And the stories are of the men and women getting together to dance. And as the dance gets exciting and some men get frustrated by not being able to dance with the women they want, they reach up into the ceiling and pull sticks out and start fighting with sticks. So it's easy to see, if we use our non-Western lens, that there aren't these hard distinctions, that it's all this kind of fluid connection of movement forms that express the same energy, that primordial energy of life expanding. And it can expand into a sexual expression, it can expand into a combat expression, and you can see how sexual competition produces combat, and combat produces valorization, importance in the village, which then leads to you being dominant in terms of partners, etc.
So let me do the worst of what I would call the West, which would be to say, so, but it's about winning, right?
Never.
Good answer. That's enough. I just wanted to tease you there.
Yeah.
That's for that. You know, that's for a part of my audience, which I know is stuck in this Western framing, which, you know, I spent a good part of my life trying to escape from, because I see it as a blind spot, you know, as an impediment to actually seeing. So I actually wanted to pose my theory a little bit, of a theory that I think will tie a bunch of my reading together with what we previously talked about, which is that Christianity did this thing when it became evangelist, when it thought to spread itself. There's somebody behind you. When it thought to spread itself, it encountered all of these other religions, and there was a conflict about what's empirically true or what's experientially true. And they came up with this idea that you could have pure spirit completely separate from experience or from a tangible world, and that the world could be split into these two. And that allowed them to say, yes, you know, we're in a sense the one true religion. We are a separate thing. We have this realm that cannot be touched by anything you can test. That cannot be touched by anything like that. It's a pure spirit realm. And this is a very, very powerful tool, actually, that allowed Christianity to spread in many, many places. And it then birthed, you know, what we might call science, which is this idea that you can have a subjective experience and an objective experience, which is really just weasel words for the other thing, right? Which is the claim that there's a spiritual realm and a true realm, or a spiritual realm and a material realm. And unfortunately, when people have this view and come into experiencing another culture, they don't see it.
Yeah.
And so one thing that you had me read these two books, I'll just mention them: Tempels, Bantu Philosophy.
Yes.
And which is a Catholic priest in the I think he was working in the 1930s.
Yes.
Trying to convert what he calls Bantu people in the Congo, Angola region, and then also Central Africa and the Caribbean, transcending time, transforming cultures, by
beautiful book, Maureen Warren Lewis.
Yes, by Maureen Warren Lewis. And so one of the things I learned is that I didn't know is that there were African kings that converted to Christianity in the 1490s.
Correct.
And that sets up some of what happens in the transition of African peoples to the Americas. And so I thought maybe you could talk about that a little bit in terms of your practice, in fact.
It's one of the biggest misconceptions that Christianity came directly as an experience of enslavement. We have to understand, firstly, that the Europeans in Africa were in Africa 150 to 200 years in West Central Africa before enslavement even occurred. First thing. The second thing we have to understand is what we would consider to be modern day Christianity is in many ways structured in a almost parallel form, or a very similar form, to Kemetian or Kemet and Bantu philosophy. The underlying structures in Christianity of the solar worship hidden inside of it, the symbol of the cross, the symbolic use of water to indicate the changing of worlds, Jesus walking on the water, turning water into, all of those to the African mind would have read as, oh, you all are practitioners of Bantu cosmological beliefs. Different words, different ideas, but similar. And so it was very easy for the Bantu peoples. And when we say Bantu, it's again a bad Western idea. You're talking from Cameroon to South Africa, from Zimbabwe all the way to Ghana. It's the most massive expansion of a cultural form because, again, the size of the African continent is in many ways unimaginable. You can take several other continents and put them into Africa. In Africa, they speak over 2,000 languages. So when you talk about a people and that they are the same linguistic family, it's like saying you could take like Argentina, Venezuela, America, and say they're all Americans. It's the same idea as saying Bantu. It's this huge space. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that when you look at much of what's called Low Country or the southern part of America, the way they express Christianity is not Protestant or evangelical. It's something else, right? It's now called Black churches, and it has a way of engaging in spirit and trance, and they use a lot of manifestations, which in that term is called the Holy Spirit, and they speak in tongues, and they do all these quaking, similar shaking type rituals that in many ways are an expression of African philosophy inside a structure of Christian belief. But it's really like a Bantu Christian belief and not really like European Roman Christian. I studied to be a Catholic priest for about 3 years. And because of that, I had a unique view into Christianity that allowed me to see what one of my elders said. An old woman who taught me Kalinda said, "Oh, you was one of them Christian peoples." Yeah, we did that too. So I said, "Well, what do you mean, mother?" She said, "Oh, that came from us. That's our thing. It's not that we took their thing. They borrowed our thing and we just took it back." And I think she's speaking to an understanding of the Moors and the sub-Saharan Africans and how they influenced Italy, Portugal, Spain, and how that then influenced those pagan rites and rituals, influenced how Christianity expressed itself, and then how it returned. So when you see Christianity from those two perspectives, that it's very, very connected philosophically to how the Africans saw the world, the monotheism and all of that, and then the cosmological part of Catholicism and Christianity, especially Catholicism, and the nature of the rituals of the Mass, the sacrifice that Jesus paid. It follows an old African ritual style of how you would talk to God, how you would use blood to pay, and then when you pay with blood, God will give you, it's very, the use of water at the beginning of ceremonies, then holy oils, then incense or smokes or hallucinogenics, because the early version of incense wasn't what it was now, right? We know that frankincense, myrrh, and marijuana were used in the chalices to induce altered states. And so now, once you take this refreshed view of Christian expression and understand that the proclivity for the African of that part of the world to easily adopt Christian beliefs was then utilized to manage the African worldview in the Americas, makes things a lot more nuanced. There's a lot more subtleties, and this narrative that is very like cut and dry, A and B, has to wash away and something else has to appear. There's a really good book called The Bantu Presence in Low Country, which speaks specifically to Americans, and all these symbolisms you'll find running out through the South of America that were perceived to be Christian symbols that have now been identified as Bantu symbols, right? So you'll see crosses on turtle shells and crosses in trees and a very particular cross all through cemeteries, and it speaks to that the symbol for Bantu royalty was the cross with a circle around it.
One of the wonderful things about talking to you is that you open up hundreds of gateways. For me, talking to you, you're opening up the hundreds of gateways. I'm like, wait, which one should I go through? You know, there's a poet, artist, Amiri Baraka, I believe he died recently, who in one of his art exhibits popularized this idea of putting bottles on trees. And he said, you know, we can't do this exhibit in the gallery. We have to do it in the alleyway outside. And he said, you know, he knew that there was some spiritual realm there, and I'm not sure he knew what it was, but he said, you know, every one of these bottles, you know, because he collected the bottles, has touched a black man's lips, something like that. You know, it's political, but I don't know. Did that have some resonance for you? That image?
Well, one, I believe Maria Baraka was Jamaican, and the Jamaicans, their cultural form is from a Congo Bantu form called Kumana. And so a lot of Jamaican dub poetry is Bantu in its philosophical construct. The use of bottles, colored bottles specifically, the use of nails and the use of trees are highly spiritual, and they connect to very specific engagements. One of the things you'll see on, if you look at New Orleans and you look at the costumes of the traditional Black practitioners, you'll see glass everywhere, because glass is a window. Glass is a window to the other world. Glass and mirrors and bottles were always used as tools of divination, right? And nails in trees were used as ways of marking promises. So there's all this old tradition of trees and nails and bottles and how they interact and how they are creating a lattice work that allows access to the ancestral realm, which is called Musuni, the other side. And so that and water, those are the four things you'll see everywhere if you're engaging in an understanding. In America, it would have been called hoodoo or the roots, right? These are old things. If you look at the old jazz and rock and roll practitioners, when they go to the crossroads to talk to the other side, Satan, right? Because the Western mind needs duality. And duality means that dark has to be bad. In the African construction, dark was the beginning. And then light split dark, right? So that dark is never bad. Dark is the original good. Dark was the empty, right? And so, and light coming into the empty was the empty wanting to express itself and feel itself expressing itself.
So, Miles Davis said, you know, I'm playing, don't play the notes, play the spaces between them.
That's it.
And, you know, when I've been learning lately, I've been learning Ghanaian drumming, and it's very, well, actually, there's a range of difficulty with types of rhythms, and and one of the things that I think that makes some rhythms, I'm saying difficulty, maybe that's not even the right word, because really what we're talking about is having an experience, right? And you have the experience, it's not difficult.
No.
But you know, in places I've been getting stuck, it's quite obvious to me that what is hard is that the drummer playing with me is putting sound in my empty spaces, or they're not really mine, but they're the ones being created.
Shared empty spaces.
Yeah. So, well, I guess that's an add-on. I wanted to connect this to the Chinese realm, because most of my talks are, most of my material is on that, but maybe not in the future. And the Chinese realm had a huge influence on what we call the Enlightenment in Europe. And I've come to realize this, but it seems to me that the African realm did too, that Europe was in Africa and China at the same time, and that the same people who were responsible for the Enlightenment were reading these letters from China. They probably were also reading letters from Africa. They were, this is what we're experiencing. And one of the big things that happened is a recognition that there was an alternative timeline for reality. That the Chinese had a separate timeline, and the Christians at that point were like, or even Spinoza, who was Jewish, were like, wait, so there's this timeline and there's that timeline. Is there a true timeline behind it, right? Which births, in a sense, this idea of science, that there might be something else. And it gets very complex. For instance, we could say that the first Jesuits who were in China invented this idea of Confucianism and brought it back to Europe as a kind of people who were concerned with a pure spirit idea, which didn't really exist in China, and then brought it back. And so the 20th century, when after the Boxer uprising, this kind of thing, Chinese themselves took on that idea, like in their conversion to Christianity, they took on that idea that there was a pure Confucianism in the past that was separate from the spirit realm. Something which I don't think was really existed. And so I just wanted, that's just a tie-in. The idea of the mirror, okay, as far back as we find religion in Asia, they have these bronze mirrors, where there's something on the back, which is like a kind of a time stamp or a space stamp or something. We don't always know what it is. Sometimes there isn't something there, but there's often something on the back that puts things in a time-space realm. And then the front is a mirror. And it occurred to me reading this material about Africa that something that hadn't clicked. I knew that this golden elixir practice or the meditation practices of visualizing deities and becoming an immortal in the Chinese tradition was based on reversals. These constant we call reversals, inversions, turning things inside out, turning things upside down. This kind of all sort of realm of things, which are all experiential. You can study them intellectually. It's all experiential, and the mirror, in fact, of course, is a reversal. Everything in that mirror is a reversal. There are many practices, and I don't know. One of them would be you put it on the ground and you look into it to see the moon or the stars, right, or the sun in reverse, right? Anyway, I thought maybe one of the things that we were talking to in Trinidad, they have the dancers in the carnival and maybe other rituals have the heart as a mirror, have a mirror,
and around it little circle mirrors and stars of David.
So
all glass.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit? The mirror. I mean, I just set that up. So
first, like just some flashpoints based on the ideas you shared. The first mirror is water. The first mirror is water. So there's a reference to water and water's place in the world. And I'm talking about the cosmological reference to water. The second thing is that struck me in the discussion is an understanding that the two main or famous philosophers of Bantu, people who conducted Bantu philosophy into structure, were Catholic priests, Alex Kagame and Placide Tempels. Very interesting. The third thing we have to understand is that the Africans of North Africa traded literacy for goods, right? The Greeks were trading for literacy when they went to Egypt. So we have to understand that there's a long tradition of Europe being fed by the continent of Africa in terms of science, medicine, math, engineering, art. It's a stunning amount of information. I was talking to a very famous Italian fencing slash. He does all the old switchblade and all of the old Sicilian art, right? And we were both stunned at the similarities of his esoteric practices and the esoteric practices of the Netters, which would be the Nubians, and how the Bantus came down the Nile, because Rwanda is Bantu. They came down the Nile and taught the Nubians. And you would see in the glyphs of the Egyptians, their mention of the upriver peoples and their knowledge. And when you really needed magic, you had to go back up the Nile to get it. So these are all little things that, are very interesting. So now that we have those connections in place,
let me hold back, because I think you will have lost a lot of people there, and I want to just help.
Yeah, sure.
Because there is an enormous amount of prejudice about that Africa is a place of darkness, and darkness meaning lack of knowledge. And I don't know, I told you this, my middle name is Park. I'm named after Mungo Park, who is an African explorer in the late 1700s from Scotland, who was hired to, because my father was studying African economics. He did research in the late 1960s. And and he was just he was excited by this guy who, and I could tell the whole story of Mungo Park. That's another story. I recommend people read Park's Travels. It's a very interesting work. But he went, and he got separated from everyone and ended up traveling by himself, and then came back and wrote this book about his experience. And one of the things, for instance, he discovered was that when someone was shot with a rifle, in Scotland, he was a trained doctor. In Scotland at that time, you cut the leg off. It was an amputation. Yep. And they knew he was a Mungonga, a doctor, and so, they brought him in. Oh, someone got shot. Here, you can help them. And he was about to cut off the leg, and they're like, no. And they actually kicked him in the butt. He says they kicked him in the butt and then they took the person down to the river and cleaned it with fresh water, and took the bullet out. And he was amazed that the wound healed. They basically didn't know about fresh water in England at that time. The other thing that blew his mind is he got to Timbuktu, and they had a fully operative sewage system in that very large city. And he had been to London. They had nothing like that in London at that time.
The biggest known structure, there's a structure in Central Africa that was bigger than the Great Wall of China. And it was a wall around the city that was destroyed. The first ever cesarean sections, which was an average normal thing done among the Bantus. The midwives could do it. The use of stale bread with fungus on it, the earliest use of penicillin, both in cheeses and breads, all originated in Africa. So there was the first steel made. So the steel that made Damascus steel, the engineering was a Bantu forges that got hotter than any other forges in the world. And they would make the ingots and then ship them to Europe for them to then turn them into Damascus steel. So there's a misconception that the Africans didn't have technologies, but I guess I'll use a bad analogy. If the technologies are organic and not built in ways that are permanent, then the technologies can seem to disappear. But they used organics to build all of these things. So the kilns were all made of clay and wood, and they never used those materials that would make the kilns permanent fixtures on the landscape, because they knew that permanent structures were scarring the land and damaging to Gaia. And to live in harmony with the universe, you can access technology and then let the technology fall away and then access it again in waves, right? So use the bad analogy of Wakanda, that there was a highly developed society that had a lot of high technology that they traded the technologies for. The first ever use of black inks, again, it was Africa. The first place they made paper. Well, it depends. There's another thing that we don't talk of: the trade between India, China, and Africa. It's like I've seen it in books, but not in English books. So there's a lot of scholarship between China and Africa. The link between China and Africa is very old. A lot of people were saying recently, "Oh, the Chinese are invading Africa." No, they're not. I can show you documents in the Chinese sacred cities of giraffes and animals that were sent from African kings to China, and soldiers and units of armies that were both in, at least in 400 AD, there were whole military units of Africans working in India and China as part of trade, because they were trading. And so those are all things we have to kind of reevaluate.
Well, it's tough. I mean, there's I agree. The place we have to start is to reevaluate. Clearly, the Japanese had very high fire ceramics very early, and also pounded steel similar to African steel. The Chinese had the 6-chambered, at least they documented it, 6-chambered creations of steel getting extremely high temperatures. And so who knows, because Damascus steel, right, this sort of also goes to India, where the Chinese were trading. But of course, the Africans were all trading all along that area, and there were traders. They were some of the world's greatest traders, undeniably. And of course, you mentioned the India connection, and actually I have a book. Where is it? Yeah, this one. This, Dancing for Themselves, by Mohan Khokar. I don't know. I don't think you can get it in the United States. I bought it in India. But you know, it goes through, like, because I studied Indian classical dance, and this goes through all of these just dances and rituals. It's a survey, really, from what are called tribals.
The Habashi and the Sidis.
It's unbelievable, the depth, you know, of dance, ritual, music traditions all over India that are just their own little communities. And
Bantu's place in that is not articulated. Like there's very little conversations of how long the Bantu existed in India, perform ritual in India. They speak, I mean, even in the Akan coast of Africa, there's whole communities of Hindus. There's a very famous food in the New World. It's called green beans or lentil peas, or Congo peas or gumbo peas. They're Indian, but they came to the New World from the Congo, because hundreds of years ago it had left India and migrated into Congo. So when the Africans came with their foods, they were bringing foods that were Indian in origin, right? And the fabrics, the most important fabric in Afro-Caribbean thought is a fabric called madras that was found in Nigeria and Congo when the English went there. They were already trading for this fabric, but it came from India. And so it has shifted, and the population of Trinidad is 53% East Indian. So one of my main teachers is a guy called Ronald Alfred, who teaches Raj whip fighting and a combination of Fulani whip fighting. And so there's all these linkages, all these connections, all this work that we need to do. There's a tendency to use the word "the first ever," which isn't really my intention. It's simply to say that there's a lot more research that's required for us to understand how early things had happened, how things were interconnected in ways that we haven't been taught in present historical conversations, and how much influence different spaces had on each other. And that's really, really exciting for me, because when you speak of the golden elixir and its practice and its use of mirrors and the inscribed mirrors and the mirror and inversion, one of the most famous forms of Bantu martial art is Capoeira. And in the Capoeira community, you invert or walk upside down on your hands because you understand inside of the Horda, when you invert, you access the ancestral world. So that's how you visit elders, by walking on your hands, because all of the elders walk on their hands, because the world of the ancestors upside down. And these are very clear philosophical constructs. I was telling somebody today, there's a challenge with African thought. The pedagogical model, the way that things are taught, are in games and dances. And in games and dances, the movement are really taught as chunks. So like there's 7 steps to a move. When you work, especially like with traditional African practitioners, they're not going to tell you the 7 steps. They'll show you it and then tell you do it. And then they'll tweak. But if you get all 7 in the first go, no one will say a word to you. They'll just give you the thumbs up and leave you alone. And then once you have a rough idea of the chunk, then they push for you to innovate immediately. Start to deconstruct and construct and play with it, do whatever you want with it. And if you do something cool, it becomes part of the doctrine of knowledge. So a beginner can come in, do a move off of the initial chunk. The elders will look at it and they'll say something like, oh, you're an ancestral spirit that's returned to give us new information. Good. So our sense of what a beginner is and the learning process is even inverted. We're constantly expecting the beginner who has access to the ancestral to bring more ancestral information forward. So the teacher is constantly looking among the students for answers, and not that they have this scroll and this is the way it's done. The problem with that is 2 things. It makes beginners feel that there's no structure, and it makes people feel that there's no order. But the order is personalized. So I will teach Scott the way Scott needs to be taught because of who Scott is, not in this lifetime only, but in his past lifetime and who he may become. Because we're always expecting the return. So when you look at Dr. Fukuyama's work, the being born and being reborn, the tying and the untying, the coding and the decoding, the fact that there's form but there's no form, and they all have to exist in the same space. And there's this constant interaction of it. And there has to be a lot of liberation to access this transcendent information. And so we try not to be very dogmatic. And the canon is not fixed. And I think because of that style, that epistemology, it does create a problem for the Western mind. I've been lucky. I grew up in the West. You know, I love Wisconsin and I love string cheese and strawberries. My parents are university graduates. I'm in the university, you know. So the Western world is good. It's not bad. But I now see, if I bring this mindset to this space, I'm going to struggle. And that space of Wanga, or what you would call, because the first ever movie about these zombie movies was a movie called Wanga.
Wow.
But it's Ouranga, like the 1920s or something. It's a very famous movie if you're into that genre. And when we look at like all the movies now of diseases that turn people into zombies, they all actually have a very specific site of origin, which is Haiti. Wanga is another word for Haiti, for Udun.
So this is Maya Deren's book, the Divine Horsemen and the Living Gods of Haiti. And it's an old book, actually, too. But
it's also a movie free on YouTube.
It's also a movie free on YouTube, which and actually all of her footage is still in some kind of copyright nightmare. Someday we're going to get to see what she saw, I hope. Um, but there's in early in the book there is a discussion about the rebirth experience and so the birth rituals and the death rituals being mirrors of each other, and that and that the initiates are being covered in white, and 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 the ritual, or the hungon, or the priest, or the mambo, mamba, I believe, whether it's male or female, takes on is a kind of channel, I would say. It's a English word, channel for the for ancestors of the past to be reborn. And she goes into what that ritual is, and you described it in the informal version, but there is a more formal version, I would say.
There's levels. You said a word earlier, and I loved it. You was talking about drumming and difficulty, and I would use a different word. There's levels of sophistication. So it's like jazz. Jazz doesn't really get harder. Yeah. It gets more sophisticated. It takes more of you. You have to be more embodied to do some of it. And then you have to get even more embodied. And some people who get really embodied are called husis, or those who are ridden by the gods, horses, husis, right? Mambos. And then some people are so much so that they become the living embodiment of the god, right? And it's so strong that some people die and are born back as the god. So there's different levels of the ability to carry or to stay connected to the primal source, the mbungi, the beginning of all things, that primal energy, and it surges and expresses itself. One of the things I love, I have a teacher called Tata Sunny Batata, and he said that one of the best ways to articulate what we're describing, the main objective of Bakongo cosmology is to express force, primal or primordial force, with vitality and energy, to bring into the world. So in our healing systems,
N2 is the name, the word.
NTU, which is, for anybody who's done Chinese martial arts, probably analogous to Qi. Right? It's extremely it's like, whoa, when you're and so if we're doing healing rituals, we're not trying to heal any infirmity. We're just trying to get more into the person. And the greetings and the salutations are always questions. How is your energy? Is your energy low? Is your energy high?
But by the way, this is really clearly articulated in Bantu philosophy. And that's one of the things I thought we should actually just wheel back a little bit, because I feel like that is, he expresses it as a core idea, that if you're missing this idea, you're not going to see anything. Nope. And he makes a really interesting point, I thought, which is that in his experience, there's, showing Africans or Bantu people scientific experiments, they were excited about it. There's absolutely no conflict between what he calls Bantu philosophy or religion and science. That they're perfectly capable of engaging in any kind of scientific experiment, and yet they have a different cosmology of the nature of being. And he even hesitates to call it being. And he stumbles a bit, I thought, on the concept of metaphysics.
He had to, because he was in a really difficult position. I am here to convert you. I'm starting to admire your positionality, but it's rocking the very foundation of my beliefs. The story of origin of the world for the Bantu reads exactly like the Big Bang. If you've ever read it, you're like, no, this can't be. How could these people in grass skirts be articulating quantum physics in the 1400s. It must have been crazy if I'm a Catholic priest who believes in the origin of the world to be this way and to be diametrically opposed to science, to run into these people with spears who are like super in line with Da Vinci and Spinoza and those guys, and they dig that stuff and not, like God made the world in 7 days. So
all right. So that was a crazy preface, but on my part, but so there's a life force, right? That you see a person as a life force. So a person doesn't really die exactly in.
I would use a different word, not a life force, but an expression of energy. And a person is an expression of energy. A person is energy experiencing itself. And to experience itself presents as what we would call a person.
So whatever we are, and I use the verb to be there hesitantly, whatever we are is a continuation of ancestors. And ancestors themselves are inseparable from from gods, or even anything that we can conceptualize as being, glass.
Ancestors are energy.
Glass and trees and water. And this is also true into the future, not just into the past.
Yeah, so their sense of time space continuum, their sense of the ability to imbue into objects energy is called wanga. That's a very specific definition of wanga. Right? So a stick fighter who was great and has a lot of energy can imbue his spirit into that object. And so rocks, stones, necklaces carry the signature of the person who carried it, especially if that person was a person of high vibration, high energy. And there's a specific art of imbuing your energy onto an object. And so that to the African is magic.
So yes, but so there's this magic, right? We could go, oh, this is where it gets fuzzy, because did you really do it or didn't you really do it? But that set of concepts is continuous with things like because I have these African friends from dancing and playing soccer, and we had some small parties this summer where I ended up eating a lot of goat, and it's male goat, right? I would say I ate a lot of goat, actually. I ate like a goat liver, a male goat liver, and I can tell you, I was still feeling that goat liver 2 weeks later. And you mentioned when we talked before the concept of funk, right? And I got a very immediate sense of that, right? That because we have this concept in the Chinese cosmology, right? You actually eat organs, organ meat, particularly as revitalization, right? If you have some kind of deficiency. And so that concept of qi does align very closely even with that concept of funk, right? And yes, being in the presence of somebody, even through Zoom, you get this like, wait, we're affecting each other.
And so it's as simple as you would sweat differently if you eat goat liver. And everybody who ate goat with you has a different smell. And so the energy of the goat imbued itself and spread and expressed itself through the bodies of those who consumed it. And that's the language in. So when somebody is funky, then they're exuding, their N2 is expressing, or the N2 of all the things that make them up. The things they've eaten, the things they've done, the people they've made love to, the people they've fought with, all of that expresses itself.
And that's continuous back in time through ancestors and into the future through descendants.
We'll use another analogy alike. There's a really cool idea that a woman carries the blood of her mother in her.
Mm.
and that all the eggs a woman has, the minute she's conceived, as soon as there's insemination, all the eggs are present.
Mm.
And if you believe that, then it means that every daughter has the blood of the previous mother in her.
Mm.
But that goes all the way back to time. That the blood of the original woman has to, at least in some small microparticle, be present in a woman today. So it doesn't negate science. It doesn't disconnect from science. It isn't like just this crazy stuff. Yeah, now they're doing a lot of interesting research into genetic memory and epigenetics and how do we as organisms pass information on implicitly. And I think it's that they're speaking to some of that. And then there's some other stuff that there's a real famous quote, magic is science that we don't yet understand. There's some other stuff going on that I've experienced. I can't explain. I can't articulate well. But all right, I'll give you a really nice one. What we call mojo is the seeing of the expression of N2. So if you've ever seen Barry Sanders run, you've seen mojo, right? If you've ever seen Bruce Springsteen on stage, you've seen mojo. And mojo isn't this quality that is only in one group of people. It's everywhere. There's some people who are able to express it, and we all recognize them. And these days we turn them into commodities, and now they're called superstars. But those are people full of mojo.
So in English we have words like charisma, presence. There's another one. I just had it. Oh well. But yes, they're undeniably there are things, right? But we don't really know where they come from.
No. So in Bantu thought, those are expressions of N2. People have high N2 express those things more readily because the N2 allows them to access the other realm. And when you are able to access both realms in the same space, you become integrated. And I think your ancestral self and your present self and your future self come into one space and one moment. The beginning and the end, all. And then you are everything that you can be. Those moments are fleeting, but anybody who's felt it knows what it feels like. I've often said the term flow for me is only the beginning of the feeling. There's other feelings after it, but it's hard to explain.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I mean, I see some resonances up beyond this conversation, but that maybe we could. But I feel like maybe we need to lay more ground. There's some places I'd like to go. Well, one more sort of basic concept I thought would be interesting to really as a follow up on something you said about learning, which is that one of the things that got me on this track I'm on is that I had this experience at 20 of studying with, say, Malunga Casquilord and people around Catherine Dunham. I did study with her briefly, and there were a number of African teachers, in fact, in San Francisco, and also studying the Indian tradition and studying the Chinese tradition, and going, wow, okay, and also having, my mother played classical violin. I had some Western art tradition background too, and just saying, oh wow, these are ways of learning are organized in profoundly different ways. So what they were calling in India classical transmission, so this idea that there's an exact body of knowledge you need to get. It takes about 5 years. We're going to drill it into you. Maybe not everybody can get it, but if you're a person who can get it, we're going to wake you up at 8 a.m. and feed you some lamb, and then you're gonna go, right? Until your feet are like raw hamburger, you're just gonna dance until you've got this thing in you, and then you're expected to be creative. But they want this base, because that is the transmission from the past, right? And you can build on it for sure. You're expected to build on it, but there's this base thing, that idea. And so then you have lineages. And the Chinese tradition, one of the things that bothered me is that I couldn't see it. There was something missing in the story about how this thing came through, because it wasn't getting passed on easily. And what I call the milieu was missing.
Right.
And there was clearly this very powerful tradition that was coming through, but it wasn't coming through clearly. That was part of what got me going in that direction. Also, it was possible to make money doing martial arts where it wasn't in dance, but anyway, much more difficult. But in the African traditions, I was like, I kept seeing this this level of transmission that was that happened to children and happened throughout the village. And it doesn't mean that everybody can dance.
Nope.
It doesn't mean that, but it does mean that there is a kind of cultural space created where incredible depth can be passed on. And I just thought maybe you could talk about that a little bit more.
So there's some factors I suspect that impact the conversation. One, at least the peoples who the traditions I practice come from are pastoral peoples. And I've had the chance to talk to guys from Cameroon all the way to Zulu land. And the tradition is frighteningly similar. So literally I can walk into any tribe along that band and I basically know the formula. To give you a different version, I can walk into probably any ghetto from Chicago to Brazil, and I know the ghetto rules. So one is there's a very strong, homogeneous, complex formula that's running, but it's not overt. The problem is it's an implicit formula. And the way it's passed down is the women. So for example, there's a very rigid structure of childbearing prior to the child becoming 5 years old. Extremely rigid. You wake up at this time, this is what you do to the baby, this is the next thing. The babies are all massaged constantly. They're always, for the first week of their life, they're all left in dark rooms. So they get to see no light. There's this series of steps that are ritualized that seem to be expressions of magical things. But I've come to realize they're not. They're just really strong pedagogy in like motor skill development, sight development, balance development. As soon as the children hit 4, they begin ring games. The ring games are very structured games. They don't look like anything. So I'll give you a classic example of a ring game that's evolved in America. It's called Double Dutch. It's an old African ring game where the children are developing massive hand-foot coordination, the ability to move, the ability to pick up objects in your peripheral vision, the ability to operate as a unit, the ability to communicate with each other and change the patterns very quickly. There's a whole bunch of games like that.
Give me some more examples.
There's I don't know if you know the hand clapping games that little girls play. There's a game here called Pound Stone where you sit in a circle and you're passing a huge stone around. So you have one hand on the ground and you have to get the stone and pass it over your hand. It's the same kind of game you'll see people do with knives with their fingers, right? There's another one where you're passing a sharp sword, right? And they're flipping the sword around in a circle and you always have to catch the handle no matter how they flip it at you, right? These games are increasingly complex and increasingly risky as you get older, right? And the games are always supervised by drummers and singers. The primary method of communicating rhythm, timing, what's accepted and not, is through the song and through the rhythms of the drum. So that's one of the, so the double dutch is done by the song, the clapping and the singing. You would call it ham bone if you grew up in the southern part of America, the rhythmic use of sound while teaching dance, using the body as the percussive instrument. So now you have this musical construct that's running constantly through the life of the child. And it's used to input and attach more and more data to. But the underlying construct is always the rhythm of the music. And now you're attaching information to the music. And so it's very quick and very easy for me to make a correction, right? If you hum out of tune, I'll just hum in tune and then you'll copy me and you're in tune. But I can now do that with physical movements. I attach the physical movement to the rhythm. And if you make an off step, the drummers will correct you. You'll literally hear them send a cut signal to say, no, fix it. And they'll do it again. But it's not done by me using words or language. There's a whole sub-language of signals and symbolisms that are built into a musical construct. And then the musical construct advances into dance and games. The dance and games advance then to life skills. So then the boys hit 7 or 8, and then they become pastors. So they send them out with the cattle. And that by 13, then you go into initiation, where you spend 3 months learning military skills, and then you have to kill a lion.
By the way, we should also mention TJ Obi's book, who does, there's a lot more to say about this book. Hopefully we'll interview him.
He's the OG of this area. To me, he's one of the minds that helped us see the patterns. The way I grew up, I'll give you an example, like a visceral example. I would have been 2 or 3, and I would go to see my old uncle. So he's my grandmother's brother. And he would keep me in the porch, the stoop, alone with him. And first he would tap me on my head and encourage me to butt his hand. And if I did it well, he would, hug me and say, oh, you're so amazing. You're my little bull. And then gradually it would get harder and harder. And then he would start singing while he's doing it and hitting me harder and harder. And then he would slowly start correcting. So I would butt and it would hurt. And then he would just do this. And then we'd play the game. So then I would learn to cut. And then I would learn to flick. And then I would learn to ram. And then I would learn to drag. But never butt with the front of the head. Because that's where all the stuff that could go wrong happens. Right? You butt with this rim. Right? And by the time I was 4, I was very, very competent in using my head as what we call it in the Caribbean, the big knuckle. And if you look at like Caribbean wrestlers, there's a guy called the Black Pearl, very famous in Catch as Catch Can world. We were always famous for using our heads as weapons. But it was just a game. He never said any words. I can't remember a single word. I remember playing. I remember dancing. I remember doing it. When I was 14, I got into a fight in high school. A guy grabbed my shirt and I went boom. And he's out cold. And everybody's like, oh, Benji knows how to butt. And I said, but because I was doing karate at that point. Why was my response not, one of my karate? Why was it this thing that just left out of me? 3 years ago, I was in the national stick fighting finals. And obviously, I wear glasses. And my safety glasses came off, so I was fighting blind. And the guy came in really rough, and he started using the puño to drag. In our competition stick fighting, that's considered very insulting. Right? You're only supposed to use the tip of the stick because it's a ritual. It's not really a fight. So he started coming outside of the structure of the ritual. The drummers started cutting differently. I heard it because I couldn't see anything. And the drummer was basically saying, okay, if that's how you want to play, then now we're going to play. And the song changed. And the song changed to If It's War, Let Me Know. If it's war, let me know. Today is Carnival Day. If it's war, let me know. If it's war, if it's war. If it's war, let me know. This is Carnival Day. So I heard the Shantwell start singing. So I understood the game has changed. So when he came in the second time, I stepped on this stick and I flicked, sliced his whole chin open. Took him down and smashed him again, broke his nose. But I was never taught that. There was never a class about this is how you trip and then you'll do this and then you'll do that. No, but if you see my 7-year-old son playing right now, he knows the whole butting thing and I've never said a word to him. we play on the couch, and I follow the old rules, and I might sing or rough him up, and then he might cry, and I might ease up. Then he gets it right. Then I reward him, and so there's this mechanism over a long period of time of slowly connecting to this underlying structure, this musical construct, attaching information. And so at the end of it, you have somebody who has a whole host of skills that can be triggered. But sometimes they don't even know these skills are there. So if you talk to men who are in their 50s, who grew up in the southern belt of America, there's a game called CAG. With the guys, it would be King of the Hill, CAG, there's different names for it. Boys would get together on a mound, the guy on top would get everybody off, and among the African Americans, they would trip. So it was a tripping game. You'd come trip. You will also, if you grew up in the 80s, you would have known of slap boxing. You would see guys all over the hood slapping each other.
I love your analysis. I'll call it analysis, but you know, I just want to say something about like this, that inversion, the reversal, and the place of the ancestors in it, because, you know, my father taught me to wrestle. He had some training, you know, a little. I mean, he you know, some in the military, some in high school, things like that. But he said that I was insatiable as a child in wanting to wrestle. Just any adult who wanted to wrestle with me, I was for it, and I was constantly bothering him to wrestle until I beat him at 14. And then he stopped. It's like, that's it. You could beat me once. That's it. but you know, there's that. And I also wanted to say, yes, slap fighting. We called it popping, actually, in San Francisco. It's called popping. And I had a lot of black friends as a kid. I grew up in a mixed neighborhood, so I learned popping. Yes, I came. Tripping. I don't know where it came from, but
it's called cagging. It's an actual. I can connect it exactly to a form in the Bantu region called Kandeka. You can check it. It's also called knocking in New Orleans and Carolina. It's the same game.
But I learned this also as a kid. I don't even know why exactly. Again, it's so funny that you say that there was no words involved, because I honestly have this memory of being on the schoolyard and tripping everyone, you know, and trying to play tripping games with everyone. And I don't know where it came from. I don't remember being coached at it at all. I just remember that I got very good at it to the point where it wasn't safe to do it anymore.
Yep, that's literally my personal story. Now there's a layer where when they get to 16 or 17, 15, 13, depending on the group, that's the moment where the child is now pulled aside. And now you're separated from the community, and your liminal transport is induced and taught. Now you're taught to change state. And that's when then you start uploading ancestral information. Some people do it naturally. Those are the ones who they will pick early out. So when you have an initiation, there'll be an 8-year-old and a 13-year-old. That 8-year-old is one who's come and is seeing already. They're jumping outside, the insatiable ones. There's ones who they're doing all kinds of things and nobody taught it to them. Those ones are picked early out. If you look at how the Spartans transitioned boys into the army, it's a similar process. If you look at how the U.S. Army Rangers pull them out, strip them down, those are representations of a very old process. That it's a global process. In the Bantu tradition, it's very, very strong. It's so strong that when Baden-Powell saw it, he said, I need to get this for children in Europe. And now we call it Boy Scouts. And every time I hear it, I laugh. I said, if people go back, they'll start seeing how much was imported, but the name was never told. So the process of embodiment, training, doing loading, stressing, expanding until the child jumps. Then guiding the jump and expanding the jump and expanding the jump till they can enter deep liminal at will is what you're trying to achieve. And so there is a process, but the process isn't hard because each of us aren't the same. And that's one of the things about the African pedagogical model that's difficult. But once you understand that some people access ancestral more than others, some spirits are old spirits, then it makes all the sense in the world. Oh, if the chief recognizes, oh, that's my father's energy, that 4-year-old running around, that particular technique he's doing with the spear, nobody taught him that. And that was old King Shaka. Then they're going to say, okay, that might be Shaka who's come back. So now we need to treat this child differently. There might be other children who aren't in any way aligned this way, and they may be aligned to another set of skills, healing skills, magic skills, hunting skills. And so there's not a one size and one path. There's a general acculturalization. There's a constant creating of an environment that feeds. If you look at how the Bushmen, the old senior Bushmen, the retired ones, are the ones in charge of playing with the children. Because it's a crafty way of not having to take you and make you dance for 8 hours. If I've done it since you're 4 years old, by the time you're 7 or 8, you have that 8 years. So I think that's one of the things. If you look at a next nice example, there's a town in Florida called, I believe they call it Muck City, that's produced like 50 or 60 NFL guys. If you look at how those children are brought up, then you understand why they're in the NFL. But nobody's doing it. But the community is doing it, right? And there's no way for the children to not be that athletic by the time they hit 16, because the environment is still that old tribal, and there's a constant cooperation, conflict element to all the sports. So let's use the constant access to competition among the Bantu. There's a game in America called the Dozens. I'm sure you've heard of it.
I was going to say that earlier.
Even on the block, like just hanging out, it's now called ciphers. There's a million names for it, scatting, but there's a constant, another thing, you'll constantly see dice, constantly see races. There's this constant.
My great-grandfather, my grandfather's father, my father's father's father, used to go and play the Dozens every day after he was a dentist. He was dentist, actually royal dentist to the Kaiser in Germany, and then World War I came to San Francisco, and he went to Union Square every day after work and played the Dozens. Which people don't know. It's a very long series of insults like that are linked together, and that made me. I wanted to ask you, because Trinidad is famous for a type of music. I'm forgetting its name.
Tempo.
What's it called?
Well,
no.
Calypso.
Calypso. That's what I was thinking.
Calypso has a variation of it called extempo, where we have to sit down and insult each other, and who can get more creative faster wins, right? So, but that's the whole, like, hip hop comes from a Jamaican Kumana form of folk fighting with words that turned into, in New York, Jamaicans were there and they started doing it, sound clashes, and it turned into hip hop. So it's a long tradition of using music and words and movement to create this environment of sharpening, constantly sharpening.
What Calypso, right, has this, because I've seen, I think there's something about the live experience.
Okay.
I've seen live experience people, like, it's not just something you watch on the video,
Nah.
or listen. It's when you're there. I saw Calypso in San Francisco years ago. That was just, it was so clear that he was improvising, for one, and so clear that he was being funny. I mean, it was a comedian, right? And everything was rhyming so perfectly, and just like, could you talk about the humor element there? There's a fear element and a humor element that sort of line up.
the cooperation and conflict all reside on a bed of play. I think that was the trick. So there's a really cool guy called Andrew Huberman who's talking about elite performance among the SEALs, and he's talking about all these factors. And then he says at the end of all the cool stuff, he says, but there's a strange factor that applies to elite performance. You'll find that those guys have a very dark, constant sense of humor, that they're always cracking on each other, and that the most dangerous activity is turned into just a game, a competition, because it creates a state that allows the stress of the moment to wade away and allows us to access a chemical in our brain that then makes extremely hard things very, very, very easy, right? So that's like, when I saw him talking, I was like, he's figured it out. The space is a space of, that's why the African diaspora martial arts aren't actually called martial arts. They'll always be called either game or a dance. The game part is the play, and the key to play is fun. And for us, fun is partially dismantling the other person in ways that are beautiful. So if you talk about Capoeira Angola, you win by being the more beautiful player. Calypso, you win by being funnier, and you win by being more beautiful. If you have a choice between doing like a really beautiful dunk with 5 or 6 elements, or just scoring the 2 points, degree of difficulty. And so when you look at sport expression, there's a challenge in that the Western construct is that you have to win the game, and so you do whatever it takes to win. But I can't call it an Eastern or Western construct, and for lack of a better term, for now, we'll call it the African philosophical construct. It doesn't matter whether you win or not. It's how you look. And it's very, people talk about it a lot. So they'll say, oh, he's showing off a lot. Mayweather's showing off. He's not showing off. That's how you win. You win by being like Muhammad Ali, talking the best, looking the best, moving the best. Knocking the guy out is not enough. You have to do all these other things to make it sexy and rich, and it smells and reeks of something that is impossible for others to achieve. And so that's where that thing is. And the constant riffing and humor is a vehicle to access that state that allows for this to happen. And you see it everywhere, right? It's just not talking, like people can't talk about it. But if you've grown up, you've seen it like a million, like everywhere. And why is he doing that? Why doesn't he just score the touchdown? Why does he run and then does a backflip and then he gets inside of there and he's dancing? And why is he doing all of that? Because that's the mechanism to access the altered state. And to stay in state, you have to keep doing it. So Deion Sanders, the high stepping is to keep himself in a certain space that allows him to make these reads that are impossible and intercept when you're not supposed to be able to intercept, and hit that home run when there's no way you're supposed to be able to do it.
But there's a mocking there too, right? I mean, it's funny because, you know, I studied some history of African dance too, and then you always learn about the cakewalk, right? As like a mockery of the excessive formality of the plantation owners, you know. And I learned some of this dance, and you know, and it's quite fun to do. And then I was Ajay Abankwa, who is you know, the guy I've been dancing with here in Boulder from Ghana. One day, you know, and he doesn't like to plan his classes, but you know, one day he just started doing this dance, and I said, "Oh, Ajay, this is making fun of the British soldiers, isn't it?" He's like, "Yeah, that's what it is. Exactly, you got it." And it was, and I could already do it because I got the feel, right? Yeah. And so, you know, this high stepping thing, in a way, is bringing out a kind of humor, of mockery, into sports.
But it's constant in the space. Like It's part of the cultural structure. So the grandmother is very pejorative. So one child is big head, one is big ears, one is big nose. I remember going to school in the States and guys would say stuff and they couldn't get under my skin because my grandmother was her tongue was so sharp. After her, I felt bulletproof.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's weird that the use of, so if you look at Capoeira, a lot of the early names were pejorative names.
Mm-hmm.
Pie de Chumbo, like Bigfoot, big head. That's also part of the aesthetic, the poetic of the African, to constantly tease and the satire and the undercutting. But it's done in a way to, believe it or not, build people up to be more resilient rather than to dismantle them. All right, and it's always a stripping away, constant stripping away. So you could be you would be the biggest star in the world, and you would walk through your front door, and your family will tear you up. They'll just shred you, and they'll check that ego by the door. By the time you cross the mat, the welcome mat, you're like, I have to remember, this is not the place for a big head, because nobody cares.
Yeah, I this is actually Australia, of course, was founded by penal colonies, and I spent a year there as an exchange student in high school. And when they finally picked a really bad nickname for me, I knew I was inside, because
Yep.
there is that thing, which was scat, of course, which kind of worked because of my accent and all sorts of funny things, but once I had the diminishing name, right, then I was brought in, right, then it was okay to kiss me and punch me and all of those things without me being an outsider.
Yeah. And that's key to all initiation processes. There's a stripping and a constant diminishing to allow inversion.
So many things open here. I wanted to mention because I've talked a lot in interviews about Keith Johnstone's work on impro. Are you familiar with that at all?
Not
improvisation
much.
for
I've heard of it. I've done some.
I think you would like this book.
I get it.
There's so much reversal going on. It's like, well, he basically says, I figured this out by just reversing everything that my teachers told me. That's how I got it. And he has games, for instance. I mean, the book doesn't do everything, but one of the first things he'll do is he'll have people insult each other, and then compliment each other, because some people can't do either. People are so stuck, and so just to open the improvisational space. That's one of the things he'll do, is just get people to insult and compliment each other, and just like it breaks
the social construct.
I wanted to ask you some harder questions, maybe.
Yeah.
This is a thing. Okay, so in conflicts with African Americans, this is way more common to me as a child and as a teenager than as an adult. But in conflicts, I would hear, and it's not just me, but you hear it a lot, you don't respect me, or you're not showing respect. And this was always very confusing, because we would flip. Like, well, what did you earn? Like, instead of responding immediately, like, well, what did you do to earn respect? Is the how the conversation. You're probably familiar with this conversation.
Oh, totally.
And to me, I was like, when I was reading Temple, I was thinking, oh, this is actually saying you're not seeing me as an ancestral inheritance. Is that right?
It's exactly that, and different ways to articulate it. In the African construct, because the soul has come back, the soul is immediately valuable, and the conduct of the person isn't the only determinant of respect. And the respect is in many ways it's not, you can't say respectful things and be respectful. it's how you treat me. If I feel from you this, and that's the problem, it's a feeling. I feel that you don't want me in your space. You've dissed me, you've disrespected me, right? And so even if you're saying, hi sir, how are you doing? That doesn't mean you respect me, right? Another thing is,
by the way, Benji, I want you in my space.
yeah, no, but I feel that there's no,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
we don't even have to have the conversation. I feel you. And because
right,
I feel you, I'm talking to my brother. And once I'm talking to my brother, you know, I'm not worried about the audience or who's hearing or who's not wearing. All that's important is Scott. And Scott's very, very, very important. And not because of what Scott did, I just felt Scott. And when I feel Scott, then I'll vibe with him. So you'll hear that. That's the languaging. I don't vibe with you. Another thing is, if we were in the same physical space, I wouldn't really have any issue touching you. Now, this is where it gets difficult. If I grew up in a Western construct, very European, I wouldn't want to touch people. So if we're in a space and you don't want to touch me, you're disrespecting me. You don't value my N2. If you don't want my sweat on you, because remember for the Bantu what sweat is. Sweat is like an expression of the chi. So then if you don't want my skin to touch your skin, so not all these are these underneath slides that aren't being well articulated. And that's one of the things we are trying to do at Boa Academy, to create a space where the philosophical construct is shared. Because I think that's the problem. The people in the diaspora don't have the language anymore to code what they're feeling in a way that's understood. Because there's Western philosophy and there's Eastern philosophy, and there's this thing we feel that there's not words for in English. And then we've lost our original languages, so we don't have the words anymore in this side of the world, right? So if your experience of an Afro-Caribbean is very different than your experience of a continental African, I'm sure you've met both. They have a different sense of themselves. So we have these codes that are running, just like the Matrix, this green stuff. And we have all these implicit rules, and a lot of our behavior is governed by implicit communication. Embodied, body, movement, voice, eye contact. That's the realm of the Akibulan thought structures, if you want a name for it. Because I don't even like Africa as a name. Because Africa's nothing. Africa is some Roman general, Africanus, whoever. Right? Among the Africans, it was called something else, right? And so I use the name that the Africans use for the continent, which is Akibulan. Right? And another thing that's tricky is the designation of the arrival. I've heard 3 terms used for designation of arrival to the New World. One is migration. It wasn't migration. 2 was slavery. Slavery is a weird word. In the old world, a slave, like if you look at Bilal, who was the Prophet Muhammad's slave, Bilal became the heir to the throne. So a slave could become an emperor. In the New World, there was no way out. There was no change in scale for a long time. So it's a better analogy would be like a POW and the children of POWs who still are they're still trapped in that space. And so that's how the world view is. And there's this whole philosophical construct that doesn't quite match Western thought. It doesn't match Eastern thought. So you're kind of stuck. And there's no languaging that allow the articulation of what is respect, what isn't respect. Because the easiest way to, the analogy Tempels would use is that the only thought among the African was to become a stalwart. That's the objective of life, to become a person of big N2. That's the job. That's why you come on this plane, right? And anything anybody does to diminish your N2 or to not regard your N2 is that you're basically trying to kill me. And that's why there's the problem, I think.
One of the most interesting things you said to me earlier when we talked last time one of the things that stuck with me and caused me to think a lot was you said that, when you said when your religion, and this is, by the way, this is in your film, I should point out as well, which I hope I can link to below. When your religion is outlawed, I should start by saying African religion has been outlawed in many, many ways, in very small things. And by the way, Tempels has a discussion of law, which is quite interesting too.
Really cool, right?
Yeah. And so there's, when things are getting outlawed, that are just what you think you are, that then breaking the law, ending up, have you been to jail? Yes, Lord. Have you been to jail? Yes, Lord. Have you been to jail? Yes, Lord. I've been to the jail and I'm going again. It's valorized. It's valorized. And so maybe you could talk, that was me repeating back in a way what you told me. So I thought maybe you could talk about that a little bit more, first of all, how you're working with that and to change that, and also how that affects our perception.
Well, one of the things is just that recognition that the legal system that exists now is perceived in many ways as being the fundamental platform for the suppression of how people see themselves. So in the Caribbean, in 2000, this is like 20 years ago, they finally removed the act against public drumming, where an African male could not drum African traditional beats unless he had the Commissioner of Police's permission to drum. And you would only be given 3 or 4 hours and then you would have to stop, right? The legislation against African spiritual practices throughout the New World ran well into the late 1900s, like 1940, 1950, you were finally able to, all right? And even if you do these African spiritual beliefs, to this day, you're going to be considered a practitioner of black magic, evil. Perfect story. I started doing the rituals that I was taught by my stick fighting teachers. My next door neighbor immediately built an 8-foot wall. And these are people who look like me, but they're Christianized, right? Mm-hmm. So immediately to this, so that helps you understand what the law was used for, and therefore it's easy to then understand that the law becomes the enemy. And actually, anybody who resists the law becomes criminalized. And so in our communities, criminalization is a flag for you are resistant, you are valuable, you hold to the old ways. So if you practice the old ways, you're jailbait, criminal. And so it makes the process of going to jail in our communities as actually a tick, a positive behavior. And so it makes sense why our young people do things that they do, because they're looking to be valorized by the community. And so for us, it's become a rite of passage, an act of being a good stalwart. He who resists the Western construct and maintains the old ways, by 18, you should be in jail. So what we've been doing is really trying to shift that. We're trying to help our communities understand that the act of resisting and maintaining the old ways is good, but that the systems and structures that we're resisting against, it does not benefit us to resist it in the way we are. And I think some of the best ways is education, conversations like this, sharing our tradition, sharing our philosophy, letting everyone understand, oh, that's why they're doing that. That's why do they like loud music at midnight? Like there's things we do that are part of our culture, but because we're not articulating it as, oh, this has been what we've been doing for the last 10,000 years or 4,000 years. So that these behaviors we perceive to be valuable, and that we need to explain what we're doing so that you understand, oh, there's value to what they're doing, or it's not an attack against you, but it's simply me doing something that I need to explain to you so that you understand why I'm doing it. That helped a lot. The second thing is getting into the communities and creating safe spaces where we can find alternate ways to valorize behaviors that are positive, but not couple them to activities that are criminal. Because that's the problem. That the bootleggers were resisting oppression of state. Then the state makes alcohol legal. Then go get a license and make legal alcohol. You don't have to keep bootlegging to prove how cool you are, right? And that's just a nice, simple example of helping them understand that the traditions they practiced are valuable, and there's ways to continue practicing them, and there's safe spaces to practice them now, because we're in 2020 and the world's a different place, and recognizing that there are systems in place to allow us to do our forms of practice, but we just have to know how to manage the system. For example, I'll give you a really good one. For African spiritual practices, high proof alcohols are required, right? High proof, I'm talking about above 90%, like moonshine level. So all our elixirs of state transit are made up often of rums that are so highly potent that you can't buy them in a store. Right? You can't buy them. So what we do is then we'll go and make it. Right? But there's ways to make it for your religious practices that don't put you against the law. And so those are the conversations we have to now have to ensure that we stay safe, we contribute to the wider community, but that we do it in a way that allows us to express our worldview and live in alignment with these ancient traditions that are so essential to our being, that even with no direct transmission from elders, the forms still hold all the way to 2020. And there's whole communities that are doing behaviors that are traditional African behaviors. They just don't know what they are anymore, but they still do it. And so that's how hard the retention has been.
That's beautiful, by the way. There's a short piece where you interview a woman in your film about voice man or stick man as problem solvers, as people in the community who so what she says, they would set up stick fighting at the market, and maybe there would be stick fighting, maybe there wouldn't be stick fighting, but they would be there. And there's an entire culture built around a type of prowess. I'm using the word prowess. That's the word I was looking for before, that describes presence or charisma or something, that is there to actually solve community problems. And go ahead.
For us, we don't perceive stick fighting as like fully the study of violence. We see it as the application of, I'll use a modern term, like the application of strategic thought. That you have proven to the village that under extreme pressure, you can make good decisions. And you can make those good decisions in a way that's so beautiful that everybody's lifted. Right? And so that's what a stick man is. On the physical plane. So as a strategist, as a thinker, as a problem solver, their opinions were always, and to this day, are highly valued. Like, when people have problems and they know you play Kalinda, they're going to come and sit down and say, Benji, I'm having a problem with my family. What do you think? Because you then become this initiated class of citizen who by merit only, not by birth now, by merit have demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice their life and being so that the community is well, and that they've shown that they constantly are evolving this skill set of making high speed, high risk decisions in ways that they are beautiful. Now, we look at the spiritual side of it. I'll share something with you that's very, very interesting. It's actually not written anywhere. And it's not discussed much, but I think we're at this point where we need to start sharing some ideas that are inside of the school in order for us to better appreciate each other and therefore create the kind of bonds we need. So there's a term in Bantu cosmology called Nkisi. Nkisi is the medicine holder or the sacred idol that the village uses for healing and for magic. So there's these little dolls, and these little dolls have a heart-shaped hole in their chest and mirrors and a special bundle of magic. And every time somebody comes to the Nkisi to seek help and they're given the help, they put a nail in it. So if you Google Nkisi, you'll see these amazing sculptures in all these museums. And I'm often like, I laugh, I chuckle, like, do they know what they have in the museum? Are they sure they know what they have? Because each nail is a soul that has asked for aid and received it. So there's a whole bunch of cosmic energy that's joined in this object called Nkisi. And it doesn't have to be a human figure. There's many kinds of Nkisis. If you look at the uniform of a stick fighter, a Boaman, it's the uniform of an Nkisi. The Boaman is the physical expression of human Nkisi. He who carries the magic and medicine of the village. He who gives his blood, like Jesus. That's why for the Bantu, Jesus was understood. That's why in our game, when we play and we cut each other, the object is to create a cut so that you can bleed into a very special hole, and that blood is collected. Kalinda is a blood ritual, a blood sacrifice ritual, where the practitioners become like Jesus to their villages. They're saying, take my blood, even if you take my life, so that my village will be safe. So the stickman is living expression of this sacred knowledge, this sacred medicine. And these are people who have demonstrated to their community their willingness. And so that's why they're so highly valued in the community. Because on a spiritual, esoteric level, they're representing the highest form of magic a human can be. That is, I give myself so that everyone else can be safe. And then on the level of the plane of earth, they've demonstrated an amazing ability to make the right decisions all the time. If you're trying to hit me with a stick, I have a lot of decisions to make. And if I'm very good at decision making, I don't get hit and you get hit. And so the king stickmen, the kings, that's what we call them here, not masters, we only have kings. So my title would be King Rondel Benjamin, but not king as in European king. In the Bantu tradition, the societies were matrifocal, which means they were queen mothers. And the queen mother would designate men as wayos, as kings, so that they may lead each community, because they were like a series of circles inside bigger circles inside bigger circles. And so the word king is it's an English word. It doesn't do justice to the role. But yeah, so that's what a stickman is, and that's why their value is so high.
The Nkesi there, by the way, is discussed in this book.
Yes, sir.
People who might want to pick that up, I do recommend it. That was great. I mean, we obviously could talk forever, which is a nice quality. I wanted to tell a story. So I studied with Malunga Casquilord, whose father was a general in the Congo, and he was sent for military training in China, where he learned Mandarin, and then he came back. He learned to dance actually from soldiers, so all over the Congo. He traveled all over the Congo with his father and learned to dance from soldiers. And so, I mean, being around him was really a potent experience. And he met, I believe what happened is he met Catherine Dunham in Paris, and she brought him to New York, and then he came out to Oakland. And anyway, he was an incredible character, and then he died in a car accident with a drunk driver who was going the wrong way. And maybe 15 years later, I was at a conference on Taoism in Los Angeles, and this guy is on, his name is Malunga, because Malunga is actually a last name. Oh, the thing I forgot to tell you. So Malunga was the first person to really teach me rhythm, and he said, Scott, I can tell you have rhythm because of how you use language. You're just having trouble getting it into your hands and feet. But you have it. And so that was an incredible, thing to say to someone, like, you do have this and I can see it and it's coming out. And when he said, by the way, being African does not give you rhythm. Let's be really clear. I have a brother with absolutely no rhythm.
None.
He has just nothing. He cannot do it. It's not happening. So I'm at this Taoist conference, and this guy gave this talk about Indian cosmology and Lao Tzu, and how the Chinese and the Indian were connected. Was really what it was about. It was about he outlined the Indian cosmology of it. They're in this era where our leaders are all liars. I mean, it was a great talk. But the scholars there were just like, what? Who is this guy? Why? And I'm sitting there going, this is a pretty interesting talk. And this guy's name is Malunga, and he also, by the way, Malunga was like a tree trunk. I mean, physicality.
Big dude.
Yeah, and this guy was pretty big too. And so I asked him, "Are you related to the other Malunga?" He's like, "Yeah, that's my older brother." I'm like, "You wouldn't happen to be the younger brother with no rhythm?" He said, "Yeah, that's me." And we had this great talk. He teaches yoga. He married a Brahmin from South India.
Whoa.
Yeah, and so and we talked. He actually explained a lot about Indian culture to me that I had experienced but I didn't understand, which is that in the caste system in India, if you are not already known to people, they'll look at what you do, they'll look at what work you do and put you in the caste. So when I was alone doing some kind of martial arts, I got incredible respect. I would call it respect. When I was a dancer, they thought, "Oh, you must be one notch below dancer trying to pull yourself up." So
okay.
I was seen as low, pretty low. Dancers are already fairly low. And so, but he explained that to me, and I was like, wow. He said, when I showed up in India, they immediately saw me as Bhima, from the Mahabharata, as essentially as an incarnation of the warrior, greatest physical warrior. And so I was allowed, even not as a Brahmin, to go into the temples as a guardian.
Right.
And so I just thought that sort of ties in what we were talking about earlier, and that was my own story. And
how it's all connecting in a way that is so rich. I'm starting more and more to see that these traditions have so much in common, but that just the present modern day articulation without the subtext is creating a lot of confusion. But once we start seeing the subtext, this underbelly of being, this isness, not so much the doing, but just really then it's easy to start coding and decoding and moving through spaces and recognizing, how it's not so, like somebody asked me what I think of martial arts, and I said, to me, it's one thing. It's just, there's only one thing. But yeah, but you do jiu-jitsu and Kalinda. Yeah, but I don't do jiu-jitsu and do Kalinda. I just do. But it's so hard to explain that. And I don't know why it's so hard.
But not to me, because we both see the same thing.
Yep, that's why this is an easy conversation.
Well, let's hope we open some doors for some other people. And I really do hope to get to meet you in person before too long.
Definitely.
I have to admit that right after we talked last time, I went and checked how much it would cost to go to Trinidad and said, okay, I'm going. And then realized that the border is closed right now.
Because one of the things that's super important is people meet me and think I'm an outlier, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's Kalinda. If you look at it online, it seems like it doesn't even exist anymore. Or if it does exist, it's like this real getaway thing that nobody does anymore. Mm-hmm. And my teachers are still all like, a good bit of them are alive. Like the guys are still alive. And I so often want people to meet the people who I met, who guided me. Because then, well, like when you look at the documentary, for example, and you hear Mother Marian talk, it's nothing like when you meet her, because she's still around, right? And when I say, like, I'll go pick up the phone, Mother, I want to know how to do this, I want to know how to do that, they'll just tell me, okay, do this, son, do that, don't do this, do that, you know. And that part of it, the feeling of it, the being able to walk and talk and feel and smell people, and hear the echo in their voice or the bass in their throat, you know, or hanging out with the drummers after they've drummed for 10 hours. And then everybody's kind of in this altered state. And the conversations and what's happening isn't of this world. It's not Facebook conversations or keyboard warriorism, or it's none of that. It's such a sincere space and such a connected space and a felt space. And those spaces are rarer and rarer. I know, you know, the work you've done is cultivating spaces like that and helping people find that space through Chinese martial art and through Indian dance, and even your books, believe it or not, when because I'm reading, is cultivating a space in between your ears where there's another world. And so then when you walk into a room and you know, the idea of that rabbit in the moon is in your head, you know, and you see another rabbit, or you see somebody, this old guy, and for a second they're moving away, and you're like, yo, you, that elixir thing is real. Mm-hmm. You know, one of my buddies and I, when we were learning stick fighting, there was an old guy, and he would only teach us by telling stories, because he was really old, so we didn't think he could do anything. Then one day he just got up and took up a stick, and he walked up to my buddy and he hit, and my buddy, you know, blocked. And then the old guy said, okay, you're ready now. I don't need to teach you anything more. And he sat back down, and I'm like, Jesus, this is like a kung fu movie. This is real. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I you know, that's actually a funny thing from your film, is where you know, you talk about kung fu movies as an important influence, and I think one of the things I tried to get across in my book is that the kung fu movie is a really important thing. It's really important, and it's important that we understand culturally that it's a place where a type of freedom and a type of religious expression survived, and people see it as something completely secular, and when it's not, it's much deeper than that.
Jackie Chan, Bruce Lee, Chinese opera dudes.
Yeah, it's
yeah, that Chinese opera tradition has, to me, it's like, because of you, I recognize it's like the magic, it's the repository of the magic, right? In Trinidad, it's a carnival. It looks like this big street party. It looks like a secular thing of alcohol and women in skimpy clothes, but it's actually a religious series of rituals that are being expressed in public that are extremely sacred. The Trinidad Carnival is a series of sacred rituals out in open that now, a lot of people are forgetting the origins of. So that's kind of my work, to lay out the intrinsic nature of what's happening, to show where the sacred and the ritual and the profane all are interacting to create this space of healing and wellness. And it's not a party. It's a party. You can have fun, a lot of fun, but even like the Brazilian carnival, that's not a party. That's a ritual being done out in public. And for those who have eyes, they see, and those who know will hear.
Tonight, as a Jew, I'm going to light the candles for Hanukkah, which is our warrior, our warrior ritual, in fact, where we remember that we were warriors, and that's part of what we are.
Interesting thing for you that you'll like. In the expression of African spirituality in Trinidad, there's three main forms. There's Ifa, or the Shango practice, Nigerian. Then there's Wanga, Obie, Voodoo, whatever you want to call it. And the third practice among the Africans is something called Kabbalah. And I'll just rest that there, which I don't even know what it's doing there. Right? But it's
Kabbalah.
Well, that's why you laugh. You know what I'm saying. And it's an esoteric practice among the Africans, Kabbalah practice. And I'm like, I know what Kabbalah is, right? So I'm like, tree of life, what's that? How did that happen? And that's one of the mysteries that needs to be worked through here. There's definitely some kind of connection to Judaism and its esoteric practices. I just can't figure out how it got tangled up. And
let's do that. It's been an absolute pleasure, Benji. Thank you.
Love.
Goodbye.